Welcome to Lady Mythos. Settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let the noise of the day drift somewhere far behind you. Before we dive into the story, if there's ever a story you'd like to hear, or a place you're listening from, you're welcome to leave a note whenever you like. It helps me imagine the quiet circle we're sharing, even though we're scattered across the world. You, me, and the myths between us. Tonight's story does not rush. It does not ask you to remember dates or names or lessons. It asks only that you listen. You're free to close your eyes and let the story form on its own, or to follow the images as they appear, letting each scene unfold with the words. Above the ancient world, there was always a sky, and within that sky, thunder. To the people who first told these stories, thunder was not just sound, it was a presence. A reminder that something vast was watching and listening. They called that presence Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, the hand that held the balance of the world steady even when it trembled. Zeus was not gentle, but he was necessary. Without him, oaths meant nothing. Promises dissolved. Order slipped quietly into chaos. And so, when mortals forgot themselves, when they reached too high, spoke too boldly, or mistook favour for equality, Zeus responded. Not always with fire, not always with death, sometimes with something far worse. These are not stories of monsters hiding in the dark. They are stories of people who once stood in the light. Kings, healers, sons, beloved guests. People who were seen. People who were chosen. People who believed, just for a moment, that the rules no longer applied to them. Zeus did not erase them. He kept them. He gave them time, endless time. And in that time, he shaped punishments that did not fade. Punishments that repeated, circled, lingered. Hunger that never reached relief. Effort that never reached completion. Pride frozen in the instant before it breaks. This is not a judgment of Zeus, and it is not a defense. It is simply a walk through the shadows cast by his power. If you've listened before, you may recognize this pattern. On this channel, we've followed another fate shaped by divine will. A woman changed not by her own crime, but by the cold decisions of Olympus. That story waits for another night. Tonight belongs to Zeus. And it begins with a feast. A table laid among the clouds, golden cups, immortal laughter. And a king who believed he had been invited as an equal. Chapter 1. Tantalus, the hunger beneath the gods' table. There are places in myth that seem lit from the inside. Not bright in the way sunlight burns the eyes, but glowing, as though the world itself had been carefully polished and never dulled. Olympus is one of them. The air is thinner there, cleaner. Even silence feels intentional. When clouds once gathered low over mortal mountains, people imagined what waited above them. High halls that never echoed with decay, steps that never wore down, metal and marble that held their shine, torchlight that didn't smoke, music that never tired, laughter that carried no bitterness, and feasts without hunger. Every now and then, rarely, recklessly, a mortal was invited. Not as a conqueror, not as a warning, but as a guest. That is where the story of Tantalus begins. Not in Tartarus, not in punishment, but in privilege. Tantalus was not some forgotten figure scraping out a life beneath an indifferent sky. He was a king. His name carried weight. His commands no longer required force, only expectation. Power had settled into him. More than that, he was favoured. The stories don't agree on why, they rarely do, but they agree on what followed. Tantalus was welcomed among the gods, not left kneeling at the threshold of Olympus, staring upward in awe. He was seated at their table. Picture it, a hall filled with beings older than your language, faces that shaped prayers, tempers that bent the weather, laughter that warmed the air itself. And there you are, mortal, breakable, lifting a cup that should never have touched your hands. And nothing happens. No thunder, no warning, no divine correction. At the table there was nectar, bright, golden, unmistakably alive. And ambrosia, food that didn't simply satisfy hunger, but softened the edges of existence itself. Tantalus tasted it. He ate what mortals were never meant to eat. He drank what mortals were never meant to drink. And still, nothing happened. If you've ever watched someone grow bolder the longer consequences fail to arrive, you already understand what followed. Privilege has a pattern. It begins as gratitude. Then it settles into comfort. And finally, if left unchecked, it hardens into certainty. The certainty that rules are flexible, that boundaries are suggestions, that the line between mortal and divine isn't real, just poorly defended. Tantalus began to move through Olympus like a man in his own palace. He listened when he shouldn't have, learned what wasn't meant for him. With every secret he gathered, the world below him shrank, grew simpler, less important. Some versions say he stole, ambrosia hidden away, nectar taken as proof that divinity could be sampled and shared. Others say he talked too much, letting sacred knowledge spill into the mortal world like wine. But there is one version of the story, the one that survived because it refuses to loosen its grip, where Tantalus did something far worse. He decided to test the gods. Not with debate, not with clever words, with an act meant to expose them. You have to pause here, just long enough to understand the kind of arrogance required to look at immortals and think, I will catch them failing. He wanted proof. Proof their senses could be fooled. Proof their wisdom had limits. And the proof he chose was his own son, Pelops. The myths describe him as radiant, not glowing, but vividly alive. Quick steps, unrestrained laughter, the kind of trust only a child gives, unguarded and absolute. The stories do not linger on his final moments. Perhaps even myth has limits, but they do not turn away from what followed. Tantalus ended his son's life, prepared the body, served it at the table of the gods, and then he watched. Imagine the feast again, the ease, the music, the comfort. Now imagine the moment something shifts. A scent that doesn't belong. Laughter faltering. A cup lowered halfway to the lips. Recognition. Not confusion. They knew. And Olympus changed. It is one thing to offend a god. It is another to bring human brutality into their sanctuary and call it hospitality. The myths say the feast curdled, that the air grew cold, that Olympus itself recoiled. And Zeus, who had welcomed Tantalus, who had allowed him closeness, did not strike him down. Not yet. Because Zeus did not only punish bodies, he punished expectations. Tantalus believed he deserved the table, so Zeus gave him one. Deep beneath the world, where darkness thickens and sound seems to stop moving, lies Tartarus. Not merely the underworld, but the place reserved for consequence. That is where Tantalus woke. Water surrounded his legs. Cold, clear, close enough to feel, close enough to promise relief. Above him, branches heavy with fruit, perfectly ripe, glowing with sweetness. The first time he saw it, relief must have surged through him. Because no matter what a man has done, hunger remains honest. Thirst does not forget. He leaned down to drink. The water slipped away. Not violently, not dramatically. It simply receded. His lips met air. Dry. Empty. He tried again, and again. Each time, the water withdrew. Above him, the fruit swayed. He reached. The branches lifted. Just enough. A small distance. The kind that seems absurd until it never changes. He stretched, jumped, strained until his shoulders burned. The fruit drifted away. Then the water returned, quietly, cooling his skin as if it had never left. The fruit dipped close enough to scent, close enough to imagine. And so the punishment found its rhythm. Not pain, not screams, not blood, but almost drinking, almost eating, almost relief. A punishment built entirely from nearness. Time lost its meaning there. Reaching became instinct. Hope stopped rising and started aching. Memory itself turned cruel. The taste of what once was, now a weapon. Above him, the world continued. Seasons turned. Empires rose and vanished. Kings were forgotten. But not Tantalus, because his suffering required no monsters, only desire. And that is why his name survived. Why even now, when something is offered and withheld at the last moment, we still call it tantalizing. As if language remembers him, as if the punishment echoes. And perhaps that was the final cruelty. Not just that Tantalus starves forever, but that his torment became ordinary. A word, a feeling, a quiet shadow most people never notice. And yet, he was only the beginning. Because Zeus did not stop with betrayal at a feast. There were others. Men who thought they could outwit death. Men who believed effort could replace limits. Men who reached upward and mistook persistence for permission. The descent continues. And waiting in the dark is a mountain, a stone, and a task that never ends. The name there is Sisyphus. Chapter 2. Sisyphus, the mountain without a summit. If Tantalus was punished through desire, then Sisyphus was punished through effort. Not longing, not temptation, but work. Endless, deliberate, grinding work. Before the mountain, before the stone, before the silence of repetition. Sisyphus was a king who laughed, not loudly, not foolishly. He laughed the way clever people do, softly, to themselves, when they believe they've noticed something everyone else has missed. He ruled Corinth, a city of ports and travellers, a place where secrets passed from mouth to mouth as easily as wine. And Sisyphus listened. He listened carefully. Too carefully. The stories say he loved knowing things he wasn't meant to know. Loved the way information bent the world in his favour. Loved the feeling of standing just slightly to the side of fate. It wasn't enough for him to rule well. He wanted to outthink the order of things. And for a time, he did. When Zeus carried off a river nymph and tried to hide the act beneath clouds and thunder, Sisyphus saw it happen. And instead of lowering his eyes, he spoke. He told the nymph's father what he had seen. It was a small betrayal, perhaps. Words spoken, not weapons drawn. But the gods do not measure crimes by size. They measure them by intent. And Sisyphus had shown something dangerous. He believed knowledge could protect him. Zeus sent death for him. Not lightning, not fire. Just death. Thanatos came quietly, as death always does, with chains meant to guide the soul away from the body, away from breath and weight and warmth. And Sisyphus smiled. He asked questions. How do the chains work? What happens if they're placed incorrectly? Could you show me? And Death, unaccustomed to curiosity, unprepared for deception, obliged. Moments later, Thanatos found himself bound, and Death, for the first time, could not move. The world noticed. Wounds stopped closing. Old men lingered in beds that should have claimed them. Battlefields filled with the injured who could not cross over. Life piled up where it was never meant to stay. The balance bent. And Zeus noticed. Death was freed. Sisyphus was taken. But even then, even standing at the edge of the underworld, Sisyphus was not finished. He had left instructions behind. He told his wife not to bury him, not to mark his death, not to perform the rites that ease the passage of the soul. And when he reached the realm below, he complained. He told its queen that he had been wronged, that he had been abandoned, that justice demanded he return, just briefly, to correct the mistake. Just a short visit, just enough time. And astonishingly, he was allowed to go. Sisyphus returned to the world of light, and he stayed. He ruled. He aged. He watched others die properly, until finally, time caught him without tricks left to play. When Sisyphus died the second time, there was no negotiation, no questions, no smiles. Zeus did not speak to him. Zeus built something instead. A mountain rose in the underworld, steep, bare, unforgiving. And at its base lay a stone, not jagged, not dramatic, just heavy. Heavy in the way things are when they resist you completely. Sisyphus was told to push it upward. The first ascent was brutal. Muscles strained, feet slipped, breath tore at his lungs. The stone moved only because he made it move. And inch by inch, he forced it higher. When he reached the summit, or something like it, the world seemed to pause. For a heartbeat, effort felt justified. And then the stone rolled. Not violently, not angrily, it simply escaped his hands. It gathered speed. It thundered downward. And Sisyphus stood there, watching it go. The second ascent hurt more. Not because the stone was heavier, but because he knew. He pushed again, and again, and again. There was no deception in this punishment, no illusion of mercy, only repetition. The genius of Zeus's judgment was not the stone. It was time. Time stretched, moments blurred. The climb lost its beginning and its end. Sisyphus's thoughts thinned. Not into madness. Madness would have been a release, but into routine. Hands against stone, feet against earth. Breath in, breath out. Push, slip, fall. Push, slip, fall. And slowly, something else happened. Not exhaustion, acceptance. The most dangerous thing a punishment can produce. Because once effort becomes automatic, once hope drains away, the task no longer feels like resistance. It feels like existence. Sisyphus did not scream. He did not curse. He pushed. And that, more than hunger, more than fire, more than chains, is what makes his punishment linger in the mind. Because it asks a quiet question. What happens when struggle becomes all there is? No audience, no reward, no conclusion, just motion without meaning. Even now, when people speak of work that never ends, of labour that eats time without giving anything back, they reach for his name, as if somewhere, deep beneath language, the stone is still rolling, as if the mountain is still waiting, and as if Zeus, watching from above, understood something unsettling about the human spirit. That a man can endure almost anything, as long as he believes it will eventually stop. Sisyphus learned what happens when it doesn't. Take a moment here. Let the mountains settle into the dark. Because the next punishment is not about cleverness or effort. It is about compassion. And how even kindness, in the wrong hands, can be turned into a crime that echoes forever. The next name is Prometheus. Chapter 3. Prometheus. Fire paid in flesh. Some punishments are born from arrogance, some from defiance, some from the simple belief that rules exist for other people. But Prometheus was punished for something far more dangerous. He was punished for caring. Before fire belonged to humankind, the world was dim. Not dark in the way of night, but dim in the way of limitation. Cold lingered in bones. Meat was eaten raw or not at all. Metal remained stubborn stone. The future was short, fragile, easily broken. Humans lived, but only barely. Prometheus saw this. The myths say he helped shape humanity from clay. But even if you don't believe that part, it's clear he watched them closely. He noticed the way they huddled together when the sun fell. The way they feared the dark, not because of monsters, but because of what the dark took away. Warmth, safety, time. Prometheus was a titan, older than Zeus, older than Olympus, and yet he stood on the side of the small and breakable. This made Zeus uneasy, because fire was not just warmth. Fire was knowledge, craft, power. Fire was the difference between surviving the night and shaping the world. And Zeus had decided humanity was not ready. Perhaps he was right. But Prometheus disagreed. The choice he made was not impulsive. That's important. He did not steal fire in a moment of anger or pride. He planned it. He waited for the right moment, for the gods to turn their attention elsewhere, for Olympus to relax into itself. Then he reached into the divine hearth and took a single spark. Not a blaze, not a weapon, just enough. He hid it in a hollow fennel stalk, a simple thing, unremarkable, and carried it down to the mortal world. The first fire must have looked like a miracle, a trembling light cupped in human hands, fearful at first, then amazed. And when the fire caught, when it stayed, something changed forever. Food softened, shadows retreated, stories grew longer. The world began to open. Zeus noticed. He always did. The theft itself was an insult, but the deeper crime was this. Prometheus had chosen humanity over order. He had acted without permission. And Zeus, ruler of balance, could not allow that to stand. The punishment was not swift. It was careful. Prometheus was taken to the edge of the world, to a place where mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. The air there was thin and sharp, and the silence felt intentional, as though the land itself had agreed not to interfere. Chains were brought, not symbolic ones, real ones. Cold iron biting into immortal flesh. Prometheus was bound to the rock, arms spread, chest exposed to the open sky. And then Zeus sent the eagle. Every dawn it came, wings cutting the air, talons finding purchase, a weight descending with purpose. The eagle tore into Prometheus's body, feeding where life was believed to dwell. Pain flared. Not the brief kind, not the kind that overwhelms and fades, but the kind that stretches, that insists on being felt. And Prometheus did not die. That was the point. By nightfall, his wounds closed. Flesh reformed. Breath returned to something like calm. And then the sun rose again, day after day. No variation, no negotiation. The cruelty of this punishment was not in the violence alone. It was in the certainty. Prometheus always knew what was coming. There was no room for hope, no chance of escape. Only the long stretch of dawns, each one carrying the same shape of pain. And yet, this is where the story turns. Prometheus did not beg. He endured. The myths say he cried out at first, because even titans feel pain. But they also say something else. That over time, his suffering hardened into resolve. That he remembered the first fire in human hands. The warmth. The astonishment. And that memory mattered. Zeus had meant the punishment to be a warning. Instead, it became a symbol. A body broken every day so that a fragile species could move forward. Eventually, much later, Prometheus would be freed. But that is not the point of this chapter. The point is that Zeus's justice did not care about intention. Only outcome. Only balance. Prometheus crossed a line, and Zeus responded with eternity. Not rage, not chaos, but order, enforced through pain. And in that exchange, something complicated was born, because the world kept the fire, and the Titan kept the scars. Stay here for a moment. Let the mountain fade, because the next punishment does not involve compassion or sacrifice. It begins with mercy and ends with betrayal. The next name waiting in the dark is Ixion. Chapter 4. Ixion, the wheel that never rests. Before Zeus punished Ixion, he forgave him. That is what makes this story different. Ixion was a king, not a monster, not a fool, but a man who carried violence like a shadow he pretended not to see. In his hunger for power and status, he betrayed his own blood, committing a crime so severe that no mortal law could cleanse it. In the old world, such a stain followed a man everywhere. The earth itself rejected him. Other kings turned their faces away. The gods watched. And Zeus, ruler of order, keeper of oaths, did something unexpected. He offered mercy. Ixion was purified. His guilt was lifted. He was invited to Olympus, not as a test, as a second chance. Imagine the weight of that moment. To rise from exile and blood-soaked memory into the high halls of the gods. To be seen not as a warning, but as a guest. To sit again among light and laughter, with the past carefully folded away. But forgiveness, when it is unearned, can become dangerous. Ixion mistook mercy for permission. And in the presence of Hera, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage, keeper of sacred bonds, something in him shifted. It was not love. It was entitlement. The belief that if Zeus had lifted him once, there would be no consequence for reaching further. Ixion desired Hera, not secretly, not fleetingly. He allowed the thought to settle, to grow bold, to convince him that even the most sacred boundary could be crossed if one dared enough. Zeus saw this immediately. He did not shout. He did not strike. Instead, he tested the truth of Ixion's intent. From cloud and mist, Zeus shaped an image of Hera. Not her, but close enough. A form made to catch desire, to reflect what Ixion wanted to believe was possible. Ixion failed the test. And with that failure, his mercy ended. This was not ignorance. This was betrayal layered upon forgiveness. The punishment Zeus chose was not confinement. It was motion. Ixion was bound to a great wheel, vast, blazing, alive with heat and force. The wheel did not roll across the ground. It did not travel toward any destination. It spun endlessly. The world around Ixion blurred. Sky became ground. Up lost its meaning. There was no rhythm to settle into. No pause long enough for thought to take shape. His body was flung through fire and wind, again and again, never allowed to rest, never allowed to orient itself. If hunger torments the body and labor crushes the spirit, then motion without stillness destroys the mind. There was no place for memory on the wheel, no horizon to fix upon, just turning, turning, turning. The gods did not watch long. They did not need to. Ixion had become a living warning, not carved in stone, not chained in place, but spinning through eternity as proof that some boundaries exist not to be tested, but to be honored. And this is the quiet cruelty of Zeus's judgment here. Ixion was not punished for his past crime. He was punished for what he did after mercy. Because forgiveness, once given, makes betrayal sharper. The wheel still turns. Not because Zeus is cruel, but because order, once broken twice, cannot be restored the same way again. Take a breath. Let the spinning slow in your mind. Because the next punishment does not strip a man of rest. It strips him of humanity itself. And the name waiting beyond the wheel is Lycaon. Chapter 5. Lycaon, when the mask falls away. Some punishments do not add anything new. They take something away. Before Zeus punished Lycaon, Lycaon was already dangerous. He was a king of Arcadia, a land of forests and mountains, where wolves were not symbols, but neighbors. Power there was not gentle. It was earned through fear, obedience, and the quiet understanding that mercy was optional. Lycaon ruled well enough, if well is measured by control. But the myths say something darker lived beneath that control, a violence that did not flare in anger, but waited patiently, a curiosity about limits, about how far one could go before the world pushed back. When Zeus came to Arcadia, he did not arrive in thunder. He came quietly, disguised as a traveller. That detail matters. Zeus did not descend to test Lycaon's strength, or his loyalty, or his offerings at an altar. He came to see something more intimate, how a king treats a stranger. Hospitality was sacred in the ancient world. To offer shelter, food, and safety was not kindness, it was law. To break it was to insult Zeus himself, whether you knew it or not. Lycaon suspected. Perhaps he noticed something in the stranger's eyes. Perhaps the way the air seemed to listen, or perhaps he simply wanted proof. The stories differ, but they converge on the same decision. Lycaon decided to test the guest. He prepared a meal, and into that meal he placed human flesh. In some tellings, it was the body of a hostage, in others, a child. In the darkest versions, his own son. The act itself was not impulsive, it was deliberate. Lycaon watched the stranger eat. Watched for confusion, for ignorance, for failure. Zeus did not fail. The table shattered, the disguise fell away, and the god of the sky stood revealed, not shouting, not raging, but utterly certain. Lightning struck the palace, not as destruction, but as punctuation. Lycaon did not beg. That is important too. Some part of him must have already known. Zeus did not chain him, did not starve him, did not sentence him to labor. He did something simpler. He removed the lie. Lycaon's body changed. His voice broke apart, words unraveling into snarls. His hands twisted, fingers stretching into claws. Bones reshaped themselves with a sound like branches bending under snow. Fur spread across skin that had once worn a crown. And when the transformation was complete, the king was gone. What remained was a wolf. Not a monster in the way of legend, a real animal. Hungry, alert, driven by instinct rather than ambition. Here is the cruelty of Zeus's punishment. Lycaon was not made something new. He was revealed. The savagery he had hidden behind law and power was given a body that could no longer pretend. He fled into the forests of Arcadia, where no one bowed, where no one listened to commands, where survival replaced dominance. Memory faded, language vanished. Only hunger remained. And yet, somewhere beneath fur and bone, there lingered a trace of what he had been, a shadow of awareness, enough to feel the loss without being able to name it. That is what made the punishment complete. To know, dimly, that you were once more. To feel the absence of it like an ache you cannot explain. Lycaon did not die. He endured. As a warning woven into the land itself. a reminder that power does not civilize, it only conceals. And when Zeus chooses to punish, sometimes he does not invent suffering. He simply lets the truth walk free. Stay with that thought, because the next punishment is not about savagery hiding beneath civilization. It is about a man who wanted to wear divinity like a costume. And the thunder that answered him came swiftly. The next name is Salmoneus. Chapter 6. Salmoneus, borrowed thunder. Some people do not want power. They want recognition. Before Zeus punished Salmoneus, Salmoneus was already performing. He ruled Elis, a land that knew processions and spectacle, where rulers learned quickly that belief could be shaped by what people saw and heard. Salmoneus understood this better than most. He watched storms carefully. He noticed how people fell silent when thunder rolled across the sky, how even the bravest faces lifted upward when lightning split the clouds. Fear, he realized, was persuasive. And fear could be manufactured. Salmoneus did not claim to oppose Zeus. He did something more dangerous. He imitated him. The king ordered bronze cauldrons and shields dragged behind his chariot, so they screamed and clanged against the stone roads. He hurled burning brands into the air, letting sparks scatter like false lightning. He rode through the city as the noise echoed and smoke rose. And he told the people this was divinity. Worship followed. It always does, when spectacle is convincing enough. Salmoneus demanded offerings, demanded reverence, demanded belief. He did not hide what he was doing. That too matters. This was not a man pretending by accident. This was a man who believed the difference between a god and a king was presentation. Zeus watched. And unlike with Tantalus or Sisyphus, there was no long deliberation. Because this crime was simple. Salmoneus had not crossed a boundary in desperation. He had not acted out of fear or love. He had claimed thunder, and thunder belonged to Zeus alone. The response was immediate. No trial, no warning. The sky darkened in a way no imitation could manage. The air thickened, heavy with something real. When lightning fell, it was not decorative. It did not scatter sparks. It did not make noise for show. It struck once. And Salmoneus was gone. Not transformed, not condemned to eternity. Ended. Ash where a king had stood. The people did not cheer. They did not scream. They stood in silence, staring at the empty place where spectacle had failed them. Because Zeus's punishment here was not about endurance. It was about clarity. A single, undeniable answer to a dangerous question. Can divinity be copied? The myths say the road was scorched where Salmoneus fell, and that no one ever tried to drag bronze behind a chariot again to mimic the sky. Not because they loved Zeus more, but because they understood something essential. Some powers are not symbolic. Some forces do not tolerate parody. And Salmoneus, who wanted worship more than wisdom, learned that thunder does not belong to those who make the most noise. It belongs to the sky. Let that silence settle, because the next punishment does not fall on arrogance or imitation. It falls on compassion taken too far, on healing that crossed an invisible line. And the name waiting there is Asclepius. Chapter 7. Asclepius. When mercy breaks the world. Not all punishments begin with anger. Some begin with unease. Before Zeus punished Asclepius, the world was healing too well. Asclepius was not a king. He did not command armies or cities. He did not demand worship. He listened. Born to Apollo and raised among healers, Asclepius learned the language of the body. How pain speaks, how illness hides, how life flickers when it is about to leave. He learned patience before he learned power, care before command, and he was gifted. So gifted that people began to arrive at his door not with hope, but with certainty. Wounds closed beneath his hands, fevers broke, breath returned to lungs that had already stilled. At first, this was celebrated. Why wouldn't it be? In a world where death arrived early and often, a healer who could push it back felt like a blessing the gods themselves should applaud. But blessings, when they multiply too quickly, begin to resemble threats. The balance shifted. Funeral pyres went cold. The dead lingered at thresholds they were meant to cross. Grief stalled, not because it had ended, but because it no longer knew where to go. And the gods noticed. Hades felt it first, the strange quiet spreading through his realm. Thanatos slowed. The careful exchange between life and death faltered. Zeus watched the pattern form. This is important. Asclepius did not act in secret. He did not deceive. He did not mock the gods. He simply kept healing. And that, to Zeus, was the problem. Because mortality was not a flaw, it was a boundary. Without it, courage lost its meaning. Sacrifice unraveled. Time itself loosened its grip. Zeus did not speak to Asclepius. He did not ask him to stop. The decision was made above the reach of conversation. Lightning struck. Asclepius fell where he stood. His life ended in the same sudden way he had learned to prevent for others. There was no cruelty in the method, only finality. And that is what makes this punishment unsettling. Asclepius was not transformed into a warning. He was not cast into eternal suffering. He was removed. because Zeus did not punish him for intent. He punished him for consequence. The world resumed its rhythm. Death reclaimed its place. Time tightened again. And yet the memory remained. People remembered the healer who almost broke the world by mending it too completely. Later myths say Asclepius was raised among the stars, honoured even as he was stopped. A concession, perhaps, or an acknowledgement that the crime was not cruelty, but excess. But the lesson stood. Even mercy has limits. Even kindness can become dangerous when it forgets the shape of the whole. And Zeus, ruler of balance, would not allow the world to tilt, no matter how gently the hand that pushed it. Stay with that thought, because the next punishment begins not with mastery, but with longing. With a child who wanted proof that he belonged to the sky. The next name is Phaethon. Chapter 8. Phaethon, the child who held the sun. Some punishments begin with pride, others with cruelty. This one begins with doubt. Before Zeus struck down Phaethon, Phaethon was simply a boy who wanted to know who he was. His mother told him he was the son of a god, the sun itself, no less. But words are fragile things when the world does not echo them back. Other children laughed, voices whispered, and doubt crept in, quiet and persistent. So Phaethon went searching for proof. He travelled far, farther than mortals were meant to go, until the air grew thin and bright, and the world seemed to lean away from him. And there, in a palace made of blazing light, he stood before his father, Helios, whose presence alone could scorch doubt into silence. Helios saw the boy's face and knew. He welcomed him. He embraced him. And in a moment of dangerous love, he made a promise. "Ask anything," Helios said. "Anything at all." Phaethon did not hesitate. He asked to drive the sun chariot just once, to prove to the world and to himself that he belonged. Helios's joy turned to fear, because the sun was not a symbol, it was not a crown or a throne, it was a force. The chariot followed a narrow path across the sky, a path learned over centuries, guided by strength and restraint. The horses that pulled it were living fire, barely contained even by divine hands. Helios begged his son to choose something else. Power, riches, immortality, all were safer than this. But the promise had been sworn, and oaths, once made, bind even gods. At dawn, Phaethon climbed into the chariot. For a moment, just a moment, it worked. The sky burned gold. The earth below glowed. Phaethon felt weightless, exhilarated, real. Then the horses sensed his weakness. They surged, they veered, The path shattered. The sun dipped too low, scorching forests, boiling rivers, turning fertile lands into deserts. Then it climbed too high, plunging the world into freezing shadow. The balance unravelled in seconds. And Zeus watched. Not with anger, with urgency. This was not punishment yet. This was disaster. Zeus lifted the lightning bolt, not in wrath, but in necessity, and hurled it through the sky. It struck the chariot. It struck the boy. Fire met fire. Phaethon fell. He fell past clouds and wind, past the place where birds fly, past the last breath of warmth, until his body struck the earth and the light went out. Silence followed. The sun returned to its path. The world steadied, and Helios mourned. This punishment was not designed to last forever. Its cruelty was in its speed. Because Phaethon did not seek to overthrow the gods, he sought belonging. And Zeus, guardian of the world, chose the many over the one. Sometimes, the harshest judgments are not born of rage, but of responsibility. Let the fire cool, because the final punishment is brief, sharp, and unforgiving. No longing, no compassion, no hesitation. Only a single moment of defiance on a battlefield. The last name waiting for us is Capaneus. Chapter 9. Capaneus, the last boast. Some punishments unfold slowly. This one does not. Before Zeus struck down Capaneus, Capaneus was already in motion. He was a warrior of the old kind, loud with confidence, armoured in certainty, carried forward by the roar of battle. The clash of shields and the dust of marching feet were his element. Noise gave him strength. Chaos made him feel alive. He did not question the gods. He dismissed them. During the war against Thebes, Capaneus charged the city walls like a man already convinced of victory. Arrows fell, stones were hurled, men screamed and vanished beneath him, and Capaneus laughed. As he climbed the wall, scaling stones slick with blood and rain, he shouted, not to his enemies, but to the sky itself. Not a prayer, not a challenge framed with fear, a boast. He declared that not even Zeus could stop him, that even lightning would fail to bring him down. This is important. Capaneus did not speak in ignorance. He knew who Zeus was. He knew what thunder meant. And still, he claimed exemption. On the battlefield, sound swallows thought. Confidence feeds itself. In that moment, suspended between earth and sky, Capaneus believed his strength had lifted him beyond consequence. The answer came immediately. The clouds did not gather. The wind did not rise. There was no warning, Lightning struck the wall where Capaneus stood, and the man who had been shouting vanished into light and smoke. Armor cracked, stone shattered. His body fell away from the wall, lifeless before it touched the ground. No eternity, no lesson stretched across time, just an ending, perfectly timed. This was Zeus at his most direct. Not correcting, not instructing, not enduring. Ending. Because some acts of hubris do not require elaboration. Capaneus did not need reflection. He did not need repetition. He needed a single answer to a single claim. And the sky gave it. When the smoke cleared, the battle resumed. Men stepped around the scorched stone. War does not pause long for the fallen, but the story lingered. Because there is something unsettling about a punishment with no afterlife attached. No chance to endure. No space to understand. Just a voice, cut off mid-sentence. A boast answered before it finished echoing. And perhaps that was the final lesson Zeus intended here. That power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, when a line is crossed in full view of the sky, it responds in a single, irrevocable moment. The thunder fades now. The battlefield quiets. And with Capaneus, the last of Zeus's punishments is spoken. What remains is not judgment, but reflection. Thank you for keeping watch with me. When the last lightning strike has burned itself out, when the sky grows quiet again, there is a strange stillness that follows. Not peace, not comfort, something heavier. The ancient storytellers believed thunder was not only sound, it was a reminder, a voice without words. And when Zeus finished punishing, he did not linger over the ruins. He did not stand above the fallen and explain himself. The world was allowed to continue, carrying the echo of what had happened in its bones. That is what remains now. Not Tantalus reaching, not Sisyphus pushing, not Prometheus bound beneath the sky, but the shape of their stories. Each punishment was different. Hunger, labor, fire, motion, transformation, silence, balance, loss, finality. Zeus did not repeat himself. And that, perhaps, is what made him frightening. Because his justice was not a single rule applied again and again. It was a response shaped to the fault it answered. Personal, precise, unavoidable. To the Greeks, this was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was order. A world where lines existed. Between mortal and God. Between ambition and reverence. Between what could be reached and what must remain untouched. Zeus was not kind, but he was consistent. And consistency when paired with power, becomes law. These stories were not told to inspire obedience alone. They were told to steady people in a world that felt unpredictable. Storms without warning, deaths without reason, fortunes that rose and collapsed overnight. If the gods could be feared, then chaos could be named. If punishment had meaning, then suffering could be endured. And so the myths survived. They passed from mouth to mouth, from firelight to firelight, not as lessons carved in stone, but as murmurs, reminders of what happens when certainty becomes arrogance, when favour is mistaken for immunity, when the sky is challenged too loudly. Even now, long after temples have crumbled and names have thinned into echoes, these stories still breathe. In the pause before reaching for something you shouldn't. In the hesitation before claiming too much. In the quiet understanding that some forces do not argue. They answer. The thunder fades. The night remains. And somewhere above, unseen and unmoved, the sky holds its silence, vast, patient, and watching. Before you drift away, if you'd like to return, subscribing keeps a seat open for you. Wherever you are tonight, thank you for listening. Sleep now, and let the stories rest with you, as they have rested with humanity for longer than memory itself. Good night, and sleep well. Yours, Lady Mythos.